pleasure now to introduce to you Dr. Michelle Watts from Hillsborough County. She has a PhD from the University of South Florida in measurement and research. She is employed with Hillsborough and has been there for 25 years in the Department of Assessment and Accountability, where she's been responsible for the district test development and statistical analysis of test results, as well as having developed the data collection plan for math, TIP grant, and the teacher evaluation process. She's also an adjunct professor teaching test development, research design, statistics, and mathematics at the University of South Florida, Nova Southeastern University, and Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. So once again, let's welcome Dr. Michelle Watts. Thank you for being with us. Michelle.
I'm so glad to be here. In Hillsborough County, I think we just got awarded our third TIP grant. I guess we didn't do it right the first 2 times. I'm not sure why we keep getting it, but I'm not part of the grant department. But what I want to talk with you today about is how some of the lessons learned that we have, things that we've discovered from using student achievement data as part of our teacher evaluation process. So we are now in our 7th year of reporting value-add scores for our teachers, and it has been, well, I think what somebody said about if it's not a challenge, or whatever you said about it's a challenge, but it's still worth doing. And it has certainly been a challenge. I joke that when I first started this, I had brown hair. And so, you know, it has been a challenge, but I think it's something, there's been a lot of other benefits to the district aside from having the data used for teacher evaluation. So let me see if I can make this work. Okay, what do I need to click it at? Which one is it? Okay, the first thing that I wanted to talk to you all about is to get a little bit of understanding exactly what a value-add system is. There are a number of different approaches to doing value-add, but they all have some commonalities that I think is important for us to understand. First of all, is a value-add system is a normative model. What it does is it puts teachers in order and identifies those that are the best and those that are the least best. Okay? Strongest and weakest, that's better. So it compares teachers with each other and puts them in a ranking of best to least effective. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that the best teacher is an outstanding teacher, or that the bottom teacher is an awful teacher. It puts things in rank order. My husband one time ran in a marathon, and he got a trophy. And he got a trophy for being 3rd place in his age group. There were only 3 people in his age group. So just because he got a trophy should not be mistaken with the fact that he could run fast, because he's clearly peanut. So that's the thing you have to also remember about the value-add system. It puts people in rank order from top to bottom. This is another big thing to keep into consideration is that every unique test that is given will have a separate value-add score. Okay? So the value-add score is computed for each test that is administered. And if you think about what the state's done, we get a value-add score for the reading, and we get a value-add score for mathematics. Okay? Now, when we start implementing value-add for all of the courses, we're going to have many more tests. Okay? And comparison between the value-add scores is not an automatic thing to do. We can do it, and I can share with you some things that we did in Hillsborough County to be able to do that. But the raw value-add score cannot be compared one to the next. And assume that if a teacher has a higher score in one area, they're more effective in that area than they might be in another. It's kind of like I'm going to France in a couple of weeks, and my husband says, well, Michelle, remember that things that are in euros, you have to add another 30% to them, because you can't just compare how much it costs in the United States than it does in France, and so that's kind of the same thing. They're in different units. Some are in dollars, some are in euros, some are in pesos, some are in euros, so you can't just compare them. And one of the strengths about what value add does is it takes students who are similar and it generates a predictive score for them. So based on how the students are at the beginning of the semester, what do you expect them to have, or what kind of performance do you expect them to have at the end of the semester? And the value add score is actually the difference between what the student did and what we expected them to do. Some students will be above their expectation, and some students will be below their expectation. When teachers have lots of kids that are above their expectation, that's typically what we would define as a more effective teacher. When the teacher has many students who are below their expectation, that teacher we would consider to be less effective. And actually, it's a statistical meaning that we do, and so we actually expect half the kids to be above their expectation, half to be below their expectation. So the typical teacher would have half the kids above and half the kids below. That's actually how value add works and what we're doing. Let's see if I get it okay. Okay, so back what it will and it won't do. Okay, value add does not work well with small groups of teachers. Okay? We have in Hillsborough County courses that are taught by only one teacher. And if you're the only teacher, you're the best teacher we've got in that area, but you're also the worst teacher we've got in that area, or you're the average teacher we've got in the area. If there are 3 teachers, one will be the best, one will be average, one will be, but there's much more error in the mathematics when you have few teachers. So it works best if you have larger groups of teachers. And, it is possible and probably advisable in situations where you have very small data sets, like you have, to combine your data and compute the value-added scores across districts, because that's certainly a possibility. It also doesn't work well when test scores don't have variance. And what we mean by that is there are not substantial differences between the scores. Where we saw that the most and had a big problem were with AP scores and with writing scores. And when you think about an AP score, children can get a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, very few students get a 1. Very few students get a 5. Most of the students get 2, 3s, and 4s. So the scores are all clustered together. So the scores don't actually discriminate very much between the students. Where it works better if you have a scale of like 1 to 100, and some students can get 100 and do get 100, some get a 60 and some get a 50. So it does not work well when you use tests that have very little variance. So for us, that was our AP scores and our IB scores and our writing test scores from Florida Writes. What we did this year, we started it last year, we actually give our AP students examinations that have multiple choice questions that we use to help with their value add calculations. Because what we found was that after we account for initial differences between the kids, when we know based on your FCAT scores or your grade point average or something else, we can predict what you're going to be. The teacher made no difference. Our predictions for what we expected them to be was not based on something that happened in the classroom. All of their prior characteristics accounted for their differences at the end. So all of our AP teachers came out as being average in their effectiveness, which we know that's not correct. Those are some of our best teachers. So we added some tests to help us get more variance in our scores. Okay? And it also doesn't work well when the tests have low reliability. And test reliability is a function of test length. The best way to increase test reliability is to add more items. And so when the test is really short, then you're probably not going to have a highly reliable test, and you're not going to have a very effective value-add system. And it also, tests tend not to be highly reliable when you have small numbers of students taking the test. So those are things that you need to think about when you're doing value-add that are definitely limitations. Okay, other things that it won't do. Value add does not tell you specific strengths and weaknesses of a teacher. It just tells you, out of all of the teachers who teach the same curriculum as you, this is where you rank compared to other teachers. So you're one of the best teachers we have in that curriculum, or you're one of the least effective in terms of student engagement. And this is what I was saying about my husband that's still running the marathon trophy. He's so proud of that. The bottom teacher is not necessarily a bad teacher. They're just within that group. They were the least effective. Okay. It also doesn't tell you what the teacher needs to do better. It just tells you this is where the teacher stood. And but it can tell you other things about curriculum. When you combine value-add data with other information, it can serve to validate that information. So I suspect, I don't really know, but that many of you are probably doing the same kind of teacher evaluation that we did prior to our TIF grant and also our Gates grant, where the principal went in and did observations of the teacher, and that was used for their evaluation. When we first started doing teacher evaluation or supplementing teachers' pay based on evaluation, we got to the point where about 80% of our teachers, based on the principal's rating, were exceptional, almost perfect scores. Because the principals decided that they didn't want to be the one to decide that a teacher got a merit pay or didn't get merit pay. Well, now what we're doing is we have a peer or mentor do a formative and summative evaluation. The principal does a peer or does a formative and summative evaluation. And then we also have our value-add data. And most of the time, that data tells us the same thing. A teacher that, based on observations from the principal, it looks outstanding. The peer looks at the teacher and says, this teacher's a good job, doing a good job. And the student achievement data says the student is doing a good job. So each of them all tell us the same story. We do find situations where that's not the case. When I was first setting up this system and running data, I had a teacher come out at the top in terms of effectiveness, but had very low ratings by the principal. In this case, this was when we were just doing the single system. I called the principal, it happened to be somebody I knew, and I knew she'd be really honest with me. And she said, well, here's the deal, Michelle. That teacher is an outstanding teacher in terms of teaching kids, but she fights with the parents, she fights with the kids, her peer teachers. Nobody can get along with her. So if you looked at the evaluation, I gave her a really high score in achievement, but low in everything else. So when we validated the data, when I had incongruencies in the data, there was generally an explanation for them. But most of the time, we find the data is congruent, and it does tell us where really good instruction is going on. And sometimes you're surprised where it is. Sometimes it's not necessarily where you think it is. So the value-add data can give you lots of good information. Okay, what I wanted to talk about now was some of the lessons that we learned in terms of how to implement this. It is not an easy process. There are lots of things that will come up that will be challenges. But ultimately, we have so many positive things that the benefits outweigh the problems that we have. So I know you have committees, and I kind of broke these into some of the planning process, or some of the processes to talk about what we found were problems. Now, remember, I'm from a very large school district, and that is not necessary. There are strengths and weaknesses of having a big district versus having a small district. And one of the real challenges that we had was, in order to do a value-add system, you have to accurately connect students and teachers in classes. Now, that seems like such an absolutely simple thing to do. But what we found is that schools have different practices in the way they schedule. We may have told them to do something, but that's not necessarily what they did. And so, for example, we had schools where all of the kids were scheduled with one PE teacher, even though in actuality there were two PE teachers, but it was easier for them to only schedule them with one. And so one teacher got all the kids, one teacher had no kids. So scheduling and the way things go about schools doing things is a really important thing to tackle. You have to get a good handle on correct connections between teachers, kids, and courses. Okay. Oops, I think I went way on my clickers here. I just accidentally. Okay. Also, we had. Remember, I said that value add only works, or you have to have a separate value add score for every unique test. Well, obviously, then the test needs to measure what's going on in the classroom. Well, we found courses that was the same course, but schools were delivering it differently. And so that meant that the test that we were giving wasn't appropriate for both courses. So we have done a lot to make consistent our curriculum. We thought we had that much better in hand when we started this than what we ended up when we realized that we did not have the curriculum as consistent. So, like for example, I'm working on some hard to measure items for PE, and one of the courses is team sports. Well, the state doesn't tell you what team sports you can use, so one school might be doing basketball, and another school is doing tennis, and that's completely allowable. That is a challenge. I can't necessarily give you all the solutions, but I'm telling you these are challenges. Fortunately, in my district, we just said, no, you can't do that. If you're going to teach this course, this is what you have to teach. So we put in a lot of controls over curriculum and what we can taught. But we can't do that everywhere. One of my things that I always say is one of the best things about Hillsborough County Schools is that we provide education that meet the needs of our kids. One of the worst things about Hillsborough County Schools, as far as my job, is that we provide the education that meets the needs of the kids. Because it works better for me if it's consistent, but that's not what's best for the kids. And so you have to work around those things. And sometimes you just have to say, I can't fix that, and figure out how you're going to deal with it as it is. Okay, you have to have a scheduling system that's very, very flexible, because you have to be able to reflect exactly what is happening in the classroom. And in our situation, we found that to be a bigger problem in elementary school than in high schools. Because most high schools, you go in, the child is taking your class, there's one teacher. But in elementary schools, we have schools that do what we encourage them to do in terms of best practices, where they share kids, where they do flexible grouping. But if all of those kids are only assigned to one teacher for reading, but in reality 3 teachers are touching that child for reading, you have to have a system to capture that data. Because to give all of the reading credit to the one teacher isn't fair for the other 2 teachers who are also providing instruction in reading. So you have to develop a way to connect the teacher and to the students in all of the areas. We ended up having a way that we can attach 10 kids or 10 teachers for a content area. for our students, because in some of our schools, that may be how many different teachers are touching that child for reading or for math. So that doesn't happen frequently, but my point is you have to have a way to capture that system, because teachers won't support your value-add system if it doesn't reflect what they do. You can't hold them accountable for kids that they don't touch or content that they don't teach and expect them to say thank you and evaluate me on that. So you have to be able to reflect who they actually see and what they actually teach. Okay, then you have to make other decisions. What do you do when a teacher makes a leave of absence? What do you do when they change classrooms? We made very specific definitions about the time frames with which students have to be in a classroom with a kid. Okay? And we've modified it every year. We've gotten more sophisticated data systems. We've modified it. Initially, we said they had to be with the classroom teacher on the 2 FTE periods, because that was the simplest for us to do. Now, you know what happens. A kid could, and in my district, this does happen, a kid could walk in and be in the classroom in 1 FTE period, leave the next week and be gone and come back for the 2nd FTE, and the teacher says, but he really wasn't here. But that met our definition. And so what we have to do is have a flexible enough system that I can manually remove the child from the value add process, but I don't want to take them out of the FTE reporting system because we still want to get the FTE for the kid. So you have to have a lot of flexibility. So as I'm saying, you have to make some decisions about when you're going to count a kid and when you're not going to count a kid. And I can tell you right now, whatever decision you make, it will be wrong. Okay? And you just have to accept that. Because any time, it won't be right for somebody. It will be right for the most people, but it won't be always right. So you just have to accept the fact that this decision that I make is wrong, but I'm going to live with it. Because you can't make the right decision. There is no right decision. You make a decision, a logical one, that works for you, and then you just live with it. But in rare situations where we really need to override a kid, we have a way that we could do that. And so that was important. I talked to you about the teachers with unique curriculum. And the singleton courses, like we only have one teacher who teaches truck mechanics in our district. And I had to sit down and have a talk with this guy and tell him, your value add is always going to be average. There's nothing I can do. But his observations with his principal and his peer come out really good, so the teacher understands what's going on. But there were some other courses that we had to deal with them in different ways. We had teachers who taught in-school suspension all day. They are not really responsible for any curriculum. So what achievement do you hold them accountable to? There wasn't any. So we ended up making a decision that said, you cannot teach in-school suspension more than 2 periods a day. And we basically made a decision that said, you can't have more than 2 periods out of your schedule that we won't have student achievement data for. Because there are other teachers that have classes that will never have any achievement data for. Our teachers who supervise students doing job placement out in the community. What kind of data can I get on them? Achievement data. So we made that decision. That's just an example. These kind of things you have to decide, what are you going to do? And again, whatever you do is wrong. You just make that decision and implement it. Okay? Okay, this is a lot about communications, i.e. professional development, some things that we did. I had here originally, you can never do enough, you can never do it frequently enough, and still people will say, what? I mean, I remember the first year we gave bonuses, I had a guy call me and he said, I've got some extra money, I don't know what it's for, but thank you. Okay, we tried to do everything possible to provide teachers with knowledge about what we do. And and it just still was very difficult to get out to everybody. So it must include a lot of content information. But what you can't also overlook is you've got to talk to them about procedures, because I suspect that you're going to be doing new data collection activities, and teachers need to understand when and how they need to share with you the information that you need to collect to do this. So not only you need to talk to them about their new evaluation process, what it's going to do, but they also need to understand when they've got to do things, what they've got to do, what their new and additional responsibilities are, because they will probably have some additional responsibilities. So we approached it using everything possible. We did live meetings. We went out to curriculum groups. We went out to teachers' union meetings repeatedly. I was always afraid I was going to get tomatoes thrown at me, but I never did. They were always very supportive of our process because, like us, they wanted to identify teachers that were struggling so we could provide them with more support, which is what this was all about. How can we help those teachers who are struggling, not get rid of them, but help them be better? We set up a website with lots and lots of information on there. Constantly, we're putting information. We made videos, and we use the videos to be shared at faculty meetings, because we didn't want to do a trainer model, which is a lot of times what we do, because some of the information was so technical that we wanted to make sure it went out right. And so we did videos to share information. But probably one of the biggest things that was most helpful was we had a dedicated email system where people could send us questions. And we get, obviously at certain times we get more and more questions than, when teachers are getting their reports or something significant is happening, we get lots of questions. But we have a way for them to write in an email and get a professional, well-done question or answer. We did some pre-developed answers to things that I knew were going to be questions. That didn't go well. If I just said, here's the answer to your question and attached a file with it, they did not like that. But it was okay if I did that, but I cut the answer out and pasted it in. That was okay. So they were really offended by getting the file with the answer. I would say don't do that. That really was really bad. But we constantly were trying to give them information. And you will find that there are many people who will go and get all this information, but you're also going to find there's a lot of people who, until the very last day, and it's really too late, they haven't done what needs to be done, and you also have to be flexible on what you're going to deal with, how you're going to deal with that. Okay, so like I said, here's the thing, training may not become important until they get their value add scores. So teachers, I would go and do dog and pony shows at sites across the district and have 2 teachers show up. Now I have 14,000 teachers in my district. I'd have 2 teachers show up, I'd have 5 teachers show up, but then on the day when their data came out, I'd get 400 emails. So you have to really be flexible to provide lots of ways to be able to do it, because some will be diligent and find it out early in on time and you can't give them enough information, and you'll get the phone call that said, thanks for the money, but what's it for? And also the professional development needs to include other people at the school, not just the teachers and the school-based administrators, because you're probably going to be asking clerical and supportive people at the schools to do some things to support what you want to do, and so you need to also include them in your training as well. What we found is that a lot of the data that we have to collect is out of the realm of what the teacher does, and somebody else at the school does it. And so you have to make sure you train those people and get those people involved early and frequently. Okay, so this area was all about the assessments that we did. And remember, if you go back to the beginning when I said you compute a different value add score for every test that you use. So you want to minimize the number of tests that you're giving. So what we have have in our district is if you're teaching a course, every teacher in our district administers the same test. So we, in essence, have an end-of-course exam for every course that we offer. Okay? We started last year also using first semester exams in our value add process. And the advantage for us, but we didn't do that from the beginning. The advantage for us to be able to do that is it allows us to be more crystallized in the way we analyze the data. So now, instead of me needing the child to be in the classroom from the 2 FTE times, now I need them to only be there from the first FTE time to the end of first semester, from the beginning of second semester to the next FTE time, or the second FTE time, the other FTE time to the end of the semester. So by giving 2 exams, I can be a little bit more flexible in what I deal with students who are coming in and going out of the classroom. So teachers have to administer the same exam, but the teachers have to agree on what that exam is measuring. And you need to really include teachers in that process. Because again, teachers don't want to be held accountable for students that they didn't teach. They don't want to be held accountable for curriculum that they do not deem as within their scope. Yes?
How do you validate the grades?
How do we validate the grades? We create, the question was, how do I validate the grading? Now, I don't use, let me answer that in 2 parts. I do not use the student's grade for my value add calculation. I use their raw score. But our teachers do assign grades on the students' report cards for those semester exams. And we create a scale that is used district-wide that says if a student got between 40 and 60, this is their grade, on and on. So we do that district-wide so that we have consistent impact on the students on the tests.
So how do you determine if that actually graded the students was what they really scored?
We use a web-based scanning system. So every test that our kids take, we use that most of the time. So the students' answer sheets are scanned into a system. I can download that data. That's how I create our scale. And they also know that I can then go and look at Johnny's report card and see that Johnny got the grade that I think he should have gotten. And we do investigate things that look to be inappropriate. And teachers know that somebody's going to check on what I'm doing, and so they're very careful. But I will tell you that when tests become high stakes, there are more shenanigans that go on than what we like. I have to give credit to my counterpart in Orange County for shenanigans. I was always struggling with what I should call them, and he said, "You mean shenanigans?" I said, "Yes." We have to investigate things that teachers do that are inappropriate administrations of tests because they are high stakes, just like we do FCAT. Yes?
That was my question. The 48,000 teachers and 48,000 tests. How do you secure 48,000 tests?
We make all of our teachers sign a security agreement. Okay? And they know that these are secure documents. And we treat them like we treat FCAT. They're stored in the principal or assistant principal's office. The tests are numbered. They come and check them out. They take them and they bring them back. We're working this year, as I said, this is our 7th year, so each year we're adding new things. We're creating alternative forms this year, which will have scrambled items and scrambled answers, so that will help us with security. I suspect that when we implement that, I will have completely white hair, because I just have a feeling that's going to put me over the top. But it is a challenge. I'm not going to minimize the problem. It is a challenge. And we regularly have a kid, and and it's like, how could this happen? A kid took a picture of a test and uploaded it on Facebook overnight. Now, how could a teacher not be watching a kid to take pictures of 4 pages of a test? Okay? So, in the teacher, there will be ramifications. We have dismissed teachers for shenanigans, and we'll continue to do that. I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to write code and say it's easy, because, but, yes. Yes, we hire teachers to write tests. Yes. Yes.
So a teacher that's giving the test is allowed to look at the test?
We don't have teachers write tests. We have teachers create items. So I don't have one teacher creating the test. I have multiple teachers. And then we go and choose items, and it may or may not be some of the items that you wrote. We have some teachers that are outstanding item writers, so we use a lot of theirs. Others that are not so good, and we may not use many of those. But again, we make them sign security agreements, and I do give them the mean talk that says this is secure. If we find out, you will be fired. You will lose your teacher's license. It's not worth it.
So are they allowed to look at the test?
No. No.
What about students with disabilities that have to have items read to them? So you've got one teacher reading every item to the student as opposed to a teacher.
The teachers see them obviously when they're administering them, and we have if a student has to be read the item, then that's the way it has to be. But we could not do this process if we wanted to be concerned about security, because that's going to be a problem. Okay, let me see if there's anything else here that's really important. The other thing that I was just going to say is that with your data collection process, again, it needs to be flexible, but you have to produce many reports that you can use to validate the data. So we send out 5 reports to our teachers every year that says, first of all, these are your students. Second of all, this is some of their data. This is more of their data. And you also have to have a way to override it. The other thing is that we can check for computer errors, like did it run properly, but if the data is inputted incorrectly, there's no way we know if that's, so that's the importance of sharing the data with teachers, because somebody else might be putting in the data. So we also have tracking systems, like when we have a teacher who has no data, so I can immediately go and call, why does this teacher have no students? What's going on here? So again, you have to be pretty creative. Okay? And my last thing is be flexible. Because again, whatever you decide, it will be wrong, so you need to be flexible. So to fix it when you come up with some odd thing that you didn't think about. And so are we going to do questions? Or yeah. Okay.
So you actually take the test, and you look at the raw score, and there is a value-added score determined based on a finally zero semester.
Yes.
How is that predicted?
How is it predicted? Okay. What we do is it's a mathematical formula, and we take some characteristics about the students. The biggest one being their pre-achievement levels. And there's a slide in here that I didn't go over. We do not use pretests. Okay? We use other indicators of students' achievement. So like, for example, students who do really well in reading also tend to do well if they're taking an art class. They tend to do well if they're taking a history class. So we stopped using pretests because teachers very quickly figure out getting a low score they think will be good for them, but okay, so knowing what other students who are the same that have a level 1 on FCAT, that are free and reduced lunch student, that are in an ELL program, what was their score on the post-test, and the predicted score is actually the average of other students who are in the same bucket as you, that are the same as you. Does that make sense? So if you think about it, we put, basically every kid gets put in some bucket that the other students in that bucket are just like them, have the same FCAT scores, have the same other kinds of characteristics. And then their prediction score is basically the average of how all of the kids in that bucket did. And so some will be higher and some will be lower because it is an average. But that's basically what value add does. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Time is the key factor to compare all this. How do you find the time to make teachers aware of all of these expectations?
Especially when you get new teachers to the district.
Just like anything you do in your district, whatever in-service you do, you have to constantly repeat it because you do have people coming over and over again. So what would you do if you were putting in a new grade book system or a new curriculum? You train people and you train them and you train them and you train them. And one of the advantages of being a big district is that I do have specialized people to do that. One of the disadvantages is that I have 14,000 teachers to try to get that information to. So, you know, that's why we created a variety of ways to provide information. Videos, questioning, website, you know, as well as face-to-face training. We also have some online training.
So a lot of this is done on the teacher's own time.
A lot of it is done during their faculty meeting time. It has been a major source of discussion for faculty times. We've done presentations during teacher in-service day, teacher professional study days. We do a lot of training at the beginning of the school year at pre-planning time. So not necessarily on their own time, but certainly time where they could have been doing other things, you know, like planning instruction and things like that.
I'm aware someone is ahead of me. Is it okay to ask my question? You want to walk the mic over there, Shannon? My question, I think, is quite simple. Is Hillsborough currently waived from the state
Yes.
Florida model?
Yes.
Thank you.
But that's because we were already doing it, and they basically, the state model is pretty much a copy of our plan. Yes?
I'm just curious how transparent the VAM scores are for the teachers. In other words, when they get their score, do they get just one score, or can they see how it worked out of that formula, how this student or that student affected it?
Yeah. Again, each year we have become more transparent. The first year, they didn't see anything because we were just running to try to get it all done and spend the money before the deadline was. But now we have very extensive reports that show them each student, if they counted or didn't count, how they didn't count. We also show their scores, and we've played around with a number of ways to give them information about the impact of instruction on that student. Value add scores come back as a positive and negative. If the student met their prediction, the value add score is 0. If they were above it, it's positive. If it's below it, it's negative. Well, we didn't want to report positive and negative scores because we didn't want the teachers to look at students as being negative. So we basically came up with a star system where we give them 5 stars if the student really far exceeded their expectation, 3 stars if they met their expectation, 1 star if they were far below their expectation. So we've played around with that, but they do not get to actually see the formula because we have 700 formulas. Yes?
I have a follow-up question.
What we've been struggling with the state VAM model is, since this information comes out, and we understand it has to be measured after the tests are administered, what is the value of that VAM score report for the teacher for future instruction and for the purposes of improving their professional practices in the classroom?
Okay, remember I said that it will help you validate your other processes? The value add does not specifically say, this is what you've done well, this is what you've done less well with. Now, you might look at individual students and go back and reflect. What did I do with Johnny that may not have been as effective as what I did with Billy? Okay. Unfortunately, the timing of them could be better. It would be great if we could give the value add scores at the very beginning of the year so that they can look at them. But it's just part of the evaluation process. So, as well as the data they get from the principal wonderful. This is another indication of how effective you are.
Is the Hillsborough County value-added model feedback quicker than the state was this year?
Surely it's not worse than the state.
I bet it was correct. No, part of the problem is some of the test scores don't come through in a timely basis. Almost all of our data is ready in early June, and we could run our value-add scores very early for everything except things like the FCAT scores. So if we didn't use our FCAT scores, we would be much quicker. So what we shoot for for October 1 is our date.
Using previous achievement data for, let's say, social studies and you're an economics teacher, what justification do you have as far as content knowledge and adding value to that student's economic knowledge using your formula?
Yeah, that's a real common question that we get. The science teachers want to have a science test as a pretest, and the reading teachers. Statistically, I can tell you that the other scores predict quite well. But let me back up and give you a little bit more information. So you're taking a biology class, okay? And I give you a pretest at the beginning of the year on your biology knowledge. Well, most of you have no knowledge. And remember I said that when scores have no variance, they don't work very well? So that's what happens with most pretests. They really mathematically don't work well. I will also tell you that in some of our courses, we do give pretests. Very few, we cut them back way back, because it makes the teachers feel better that they're giving their content test. But statistically, they do not contribute to our ability to predict. So somebody asked me one time, aren't you afraid the teachers are going to game you, i.e. tell the students not to do well? And I said, well, actually, I'm kind of gaming them because I don't really count the tests in them all that much. So the teachers feel better that it's there, but it doesn't contribute to my ability to predict. Yes?
You mentioned at one time you get scores set ranges for how they refer to grades.
Yes.
Do those change based on each year, or they
Yes.
set criteria?
Yes, they change. Because our tests change. So, like I said, I've been working on test development for 25 years in Hillsborough County schools, and we used to have a grading scale that 80, 90, 70, 60 on our tests. And some of the tests that would work well. We got history tests where that was great. But the math tests, oh my God, I cannot get the math teachers to write a test where 90%, anybody would get 90%. And so we just gave up. And we said, if one thing can be constant, and I can't hold the difficulty of the test constant. I can't do that. And even though it looks like on the FCAT that they're holding a constant where you have to have a 300 to pass, they really adjust it based on the raw score is different based on the difficulty of the test. So we just gave up and we said, we're going to scale our tests. And what we do is we use the distribution of students' grades. So if 10% of the kids in Algebra 1 are making an A, we go down and the top 10% of the kids on that test, we give them an A. Because I can't control the constant difficulty of the test. I wish I could, but yes.
Did you say that you had already started one bonus pay?
Didn't hear you.
Have you already started giving bonus pay?
Oh, we've been giving bonus pay for
What's the consensus?
7 years. Pardon?
What is the consensus of the districts that you as a follow-up with this morning's question, do you consider it fair?
Do I consider it fair? The teachers who, I don't know, that's kind of a hard question. And, you know, the teachers that we give bonus pay to, I can tell you with unequivocal conviction that they're high-quality teachers. I can tell you that. Do some of the teachers who do not get bonuses deserve it? Yes, I think they probably do. Because you know, anytime where you're trying to make a division between this, I have enough money to give 5%, so I give the top 5%. Well, if I could give 6%, these ones are not necessarily all that different. But we have to make cutoff points. So I'm very comfortable that the teachers we give bonuses to are highly exceptional teachers.
And are the other teachers able to get increases in any other way?
We have so many ways that teachers can earn additional money into their base pay, some of which that are competitive in other ways, some of which are based on activities or where you work or what you're doing. So teachers have many opportunities for additional pay in our structure.
I have one last question. I just want to know, what data do teachers get at the beginning of the year? Do they know which bucket each child is in the classroom, or does it break down that way? And then when you look at teachers, do you combine the FCAT scores and end-of-course exams, or do you only use end-of-course exams?
We only use FCAT scores for reading and math as a post-test. So if you're teaching in an FCAT year, we use that as a post-test. But we also use other tests as well. Virtually all of our courses have more than one post-test for teachers to be used for their evaluation. So like I said, now we have a first semester exam, a second semester exam. So if you're teaching 9th grade English in our district, you're going to have the FCAT score. You're going to have our writing test that we give. You're also going to have 2 semester exams. So every student in a 9th grade English class will have 4 value-add scores. And we do examine them for continuity. So if one of them, you know, if the student is way out of line in one, we're going to go back and look at, is there a problem with that test? Particularly if it occurs with many students. If it occurred with just one student, no, we wouldn't. You know, that could just be my dog got run over by a car that day and I thought I had a test score. The other was, do we share information? Teachers get all of their data. We report it out to them 5 times. And they have to be able to make corrections on it. Because somebody meant to type in a 20 on something that we have to manually do, and they need to be able to correct it.
Dr. Watts, thank you so much.